As you all know, we're here to welcome Ramona Ausubel for her new collection, Awayland Stories. She's the author of 3 previous books, including the 2016 novel Sons and Daughters of Ease and Plenty, which was an NPR and SF Chronicle Best Book of the Year. She's won, among other awards, the Penn Center USA Literary Award for Fiction, and been nominated for honors including the Pushcart Prize and the Frank O'Connor International Story Award. Her work has appeared in nearly every major literary magazine, including The New Yorker, Plowshares, Oxford American, and online in the Paris Review. She's currently a faculty member of the MFA program at the Institute of American Indian Arts. Her new book, Awayland, is an incredible collection of stories and a reminder that Ausubel is a master of the short story form. Whether concerning the amorous prospects of a Cyclops, a daughter witnessing her mother slowly turn to mist, or a mayor trying to encourage a flagging birth rate by creating a rather strange contest, these stories offer poignant meditations on loss and family, love, and belonging. As Alana Masad writes of the collection in the LA Review of Books, anxious, whimsical, and deeply felt, Ausubel's stories weave a remarkable and beautiful tapestry of emotion. Any of you who've already read the book or any of her work previously know that this is most certainly true. So please, once again, join me in welcoming Ramona Ausubel.
Thank you, Molly. That was very nice. I'm so happy. This bookstore it's like the bookstore of the world. I feel like this is the bookstore, and I've never been here before, and I'm so happy to be here. So thank you all for coming, and to Politics and Prose for having me. I started this book. I'm going to talk for a couple minutes, and then I'm going to read you a very short story, and then you can ask questions. I didn't know that it was going to be this book. When I finished graduate school, I was given a small fellowship at the end. It was a few $1,000s, and it would be enough to pay my rent in Orange County for like 5 minutes, or enough for me to convince my husband to quit his job and travel around the world for a while. You know, if we went to cheap places, we could make this really stretch out. And I really wanted this fellowship to turn into some kind of a writing doorway. I wanted it to lead me to the next thing and not just give me a few weeks of sitting at my sad little desk there. So it took me a while to convince him that quitting his job was a good plan, but I prevailed. And we left for about 9 months. And I thought that what I was going to do was research a book that considered a book of nonfiction, because this sounded like a good idea to me, like the kind of thing that the world would want, a book of nonfiction about what it means to consider having a child at this moment on the planet. So I was thinking about climate change, and I was thinking about politics, and I was thinking about, all of the awful things that are happening everywhere. And so I wanted to talk to people and do interviews all over the world and then write this kind of book about it. Only I am not a nonfiction writer, so I didn't really know what that meant. It was just a concept that I had in my head, and it sounded like it sort of bolstered the idea, and it felt like this is comforting because it sounds official, and it sounds like an interview you'd hear on Fresh Air, and so I was going to go off and do that, and that was going to be a good plan. So off we went, and we were having a great time, and I was collecting lots of details, and I did do interviews, which were fun. I liked doing the interviews. But about halfway through, we were in India, and it hit me that I was just not the writer for this book. There was no way that I was going to be able to do it, or that I wanted to do it. It wasn't my project at all. And then I felt sad because I felt like I had squandered all of the money and all of the goodwill that I had built up from everybody, and that I turned out I wasn't a writer after all, and I was going to fail at this, and I was going to go home, and I was going to have to, I have a list. I have it still in the little journal that I was keeping on that trip, where I was like, maybe I'll open a popsicle stand. Maybe I'll become a midwife. Here's all the other career possibilities for me upon arrival back in the U.S. But then we kept walking for a few days, and I tried to calm myself down, and eventually I realized that I needed to let go of that project because that project belonged to somebody else, but that I needed to also have faith that all of this stuff was going to come out somewhere else. And I also had a novel, which was my first novel, No One Is Here Except All of Us, that needed to be completely finished and had not gotten the full attention yet. So I made myself a promise that I would spend as much time on plan A as I would on imagining all the other possible universes and things that I could do in all of those universes. So we got home, and I worked On the novel, for 6 months, doing nothing else, we rented a miniature little house in New Mexico where I grew up, and I just sat on the child-sized couch and fed the wood stove and wrote for like 10 hours a day. And I figured out the book, and I'd never allowed myself to completely fall into it like that before. So that was happening. But at the same time, I started to write these little weird stories. And the first of those stories was about this bunch of animal mummies that we had seen at the Egypt Museum in Cairo. There's the King Tut, everything, beautiful, golden, jewels, dazzling, spectacular artifacts. And then off in the corner, there's a room full of animal mummies. And on the wall, there's a plaque, and it says, "The animal mummies wish to thank the following." And then there's a list of donors. And I thought, oh, do they? Is that what the animal mummies want to say to you? So I knew that would be a title, and I wrote that down in my book. But I originally actually sent it to a friend and was like, "You should use this title." And he was like, "I think you should use that title." Maybe he still will someday. I would like him to. But so I started writing these weird little stories, and I wasn't thinking of them as a book, but they collected and accumulated over all of these years. That trip was in 2009. And there are even a couple of stories in the book that were starts that I discovered that were even earlier than that. So somewhere in the last couple of years, I started to look at all of that work, and I realized that it was in all of those places that we had been to, and it was absolutely concerning that question. What does it mean to consider starting a family at this moment on the planet? What does it mean to think about the future in that way? What does it mean to hold a piece of the future in your body or in your life? And so I was doing all the things that I set out to do, but I was doing them in fiction, and I was doing them in my own very weird way, which is, I've learned now, the way to go. That's way better. and it's the only thing I'll ever be successful at. I know now to just let go of all of that other stuff, because it's just not my job to do. So here we are. And I feel like it was such a gift to feel like I could do the things that I could follow the questions that I really cared about, but I didn't have to kind of transform myself into another human being in order to pursue them, that I could pursue them in a way that was absolutely mine to do. So now I'm going to read you one of those very short, weird stories. And it is in 2 voices, which you will easily figure out. It's called "You Can Find Love Now." You are lonely, but you don't have to be. You have so many great qualities. Just think of all the single ladies out there who are waiting to hear from you. Whether you are looking for lasting love or just a little fun, this is the only guide to online dating you'll ever need. Within the hour, you'll be on your way to eternal happiness. Let's get started. When creating your username, keep in mind that it should be concise and easy to remember. Make it personal. If you're a dancer, maybe try Hip Dancer 21. Find me at Cyclops 15. Cyclops 1 through 14 were taken. Now choose a tagline that will attract the woman you want. Secret. Do what no one else is doing. I'm 8 feet tall, and I have one giant eye. What are your interests? Be honest, but enticing. I hand sew my own shoes using a needle made from the fang of a wolf. I sleep hot. I want nothing more than a sheet on my bed, even in winter, even in a cave. Know who your target is. Where does she live? What does she look like? What hobbies does she have? I like fat girls, old girls, tall girls, tired girls. Girls who lack adequate clothing. Girls whose best idea for getting my attention is to send a photo of themselves holding a suggestive popsicle, their fists covered in red melt. Girls in wheelchairs. Girls who work professionally at the Renaissance Fair. You could choose other men. Men who like to think about feet. Men who have thick back hair. Men whose greatest pride is the time they flew to a nearby nation and tried to deplete its stores of alcohol and slept on the beach one night. Wasn't that so fun? And when they woke up, everything had been stolen or lost, and they had to walk back to the pastel yellow hotel naked in the early heat of another day in paradise. Everyone has had good times. Everyone has a picture of himself in front of a pinkening sunset with a glass of white wine. Choose them if you want to. Choose me if you want someone to hold you above his head in the moonlight, bite your wrist until the first rust comes out. Tell the ladies a little more about yourself. What's your own unique story? The first generation of Cyclops were forgers. The next generation, my generation, was a band of thuggish shepherds living in the grasslands of Sicily. We trapped so-called heroes in our caves. We bit into the warm butter of a human leg, but the only one who got famous for it was my brother. We still live under volcanoes, hacking at iron, trying to revive the old tradition. I left home, too hot, too old, and live in Washington State. I like the fog. I like the rain. My volcano is more famous than any of my brother's volcanoes. I never hear from them. They're not on email. I teach online English classes not to get paid, but because I like to feel smarter than someone else. I teach all the classic books, except the Odyssey. My photos are taken in profile. Maybe there's time to get braver, to embrace my own unique beauty. I subscribe to the magazines that tell me we are all beautiful if only we can learn to tap into our potential. I am me, and no one else is me, and that is a miracle. I am a miracle. The downside. My mother has been dead for some hundreds of years, so you'll never meet her. The upside. My father is the god of the sea, so we can guarantee good weather on our honeymoon cruise. He's shitty at love, my dad. He smells like an over-cleaned wound, and he won't quit working. Every day and every night, somewhere in one of the world's oceans, my father is striking the surface of the abyss with swords of fire. Do you smoke? Do you drink? How often do you exercise? Do you support charities that help animals? With an unexpected bonus, would you A, donate to a cause you really believe in, B, save half and spend the rest, or C, celebrate with your friends and margaritas? If you want me to set a trap, I'll set a trap. A first date picking blueberries in the whitest, cleanest sunlight, tin pails. I'll bring sandwiches and chilled Chardonnay and tell you that we are already the good people we wanted to become. Maybe you'll be generous and keep up the conversation all afternoon. Pretty Karen 98 was generous. Pretty Karen 98 looked into my eye when we chatted online and laughed at my jokes. But she never answered my messages after our date, even though her status was still marked single. Don't mention your previous relationship history. Leave your emotional baggage packed and in the closet. You are on the market because you are awesome. Sorry, let's try that again. My actual perfect day? Descending below ground early, full of milk and blood and meat to forge iron. There is no such thing as day or night in the volcano, and any sense of time comes from watching the metal change shape. From ore to spear, from ore to trident, from ore to thunderbolt. If I am strong that day, the mountains will shake with the strike of my hammer, the heat of my flame. I can't ski. I should be better at basketball than I am. I don't eat vegetables. But my eye is blue, and it's pale, and it's beautiful. My vision is good, though not great, but understand this. I will never again visit an ophthalmologist or an optometrist or anyone else who claims to be an expert of my organ. I do not fit in the chair, and I wish I could forget lying on my back on the floor of that darkened room while a small man climbed onto my chest with that sharp point of light. I'm not sorry for what I did to him. Now he can see for himself what it's like to have one eye. You have almost finished creating a magnetic online dating profile that will attract more women than you ever thought possible. What else do you want the ladies to know? Remember, be yourself. I do remember the old feeling sometimes. A maiden washes up on my island, tailed or otherwise. The cave is sweating and there are mineral stalks growing on the ceiling. I have no idea what time it is ever. All my wrist and ankle shackles are homemade, struck from iron I myself dug from the earth. The maidens were not as beautiful as the stories tell you. Their hair was salt stringy and their faces were pruned. Too long in seawater can unmake any loveliness. Yet I meant to love them. I meant to tend to their wounds. When I pounded the shackles with my hammer, the person I imagined chaining was my father. I imagined slipping the cuffs around his watery arms, not to hurt him, but to keep him. But my father never offered himself up on my rocky beach. I'd see his big hand out there sometimes swilling the surface of the sea, but he never came close. Maybe he was the one who threw the maidens to me, his dear son, his wifeless boy, wanting an heir. I will not shackle your slender wrists to the cold walls or gnaw your nails down to the quick with my remaining teeth. I will not leave you hungry while I eat a roast goat at your feet. I've dealt with those issues. Imagine the inverse. I have the softest mattress in the world, made of the combed fur of fawns. Choose me and you'll be choosing warm oil on your hands and cold water in your glass. Meat on your plate from a lamb that suckled on my pinky when it was first born. If I came to your house tonight, where would I find you? The living room? The kitchen? Waiting at the door? I'll call you Aphrodite and smell the sea in your hair and shuck oysters for you from the depths. I'll tell you that I've never seen a real goddess until now. Come with me and be adored deep below the earth. While you sleep, I will strike a huge sheet of metal until the shape of your body comes into relief. You never have to take me to meet your friends. You never have to take me anywhere. You never even have to see me in the light. Your grandmother will tell you that all the good men are gone, but then here I am, and I'm ready for you. Thank you. Thank you. Do you guys have questions about what it's like to be a Cyclops on the internet? I don't really know, but I feel like that I think that he is not the creepiest guy online at all. I think he's kind of a catch, actually. I've come to feel like he's really one of the good ones, but I made him up, so maybe that's unfair.
So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the role of the weird stuff in your writing. How you, in this story in particular, it's sort of paired with this very commonplace thing that we have, the dating profile now. So how did those two sort of work with each other?
That's a good question. This story, there was a few different inceptions, and it kind of all came crashing together at some point. But I had friends who were doing the online dating thing and were going out with all these people who seemed, there was like the guy who emptied the ATM machines all over San Francisco, and so was always terrified that someone was following him because all his money in his car. It's like, that guy, don't go out with that guy again. No, please. They just were accumulating all these stories of like, but maybe he's okay. And so that was like brewing in my mind. And then I was thinking about riding ferries around Greece and listening to the Odyssey on our headphones, on our little splitter, my husband and I together. And the rhythm of those stories and the way that the characters kind of like grow up out of the landscape. And then I was imagining displacement. So I was thinking about what if I took one of those creature people and moved them to a completely different setting. And I don't know, somewhere in there it occurred to me to try the two things together. But it took a while because the first draft was just a joke. It was just a cute idea. What if a Cyclops filled out an online dating profile? And it didn't have any heart. It didn't matter, and it didn't go into any kind of depth. The character didn't really come in for a few weeks of working on it. So it had to be, this is what happens to me. I'll have some kind of a clever idea, and then the job is to actually like burrow down way underneath and find something very, very real within that. There's nothing to it otherwise. I'm not interested if it's just a joke. So it has to be about the real world in some way, and it has to definitely be about the sort of human experience. And it has to always keep surprising me, because I know if it's not surprising me, it's not going to surprise anybody else, and it's not going to be interesting. So finding those places of tension where the two voices work so differently that it felt like they were sort of propelling each other on. And the voice, I mean, the questions are not fiction. Like, that was mostly, I edited it down, but basically that was the legit guide for how you should do this. I found it really depressing. I'm like, that's the worst. All right, we got to use it. Yeah. Are there questions? Are any of you writers? Oh, you can come up. They're good. You a writer? Yeah. Are you a fiction writer yeah? Good. So you know how to live in the weird of your own mind. Yeah.
So actually going off of what you were just talking about, do you have any of those those ideas that are now just jokes that you're trying to work through? Do you have like a binder somewhere of lots of joke ideas and that you're currently working through?
Yes, I do. I always have some of those going. There's a neighborhood near where I just moved earlier this year, which kind of, I feel like part of why I haven't figured it out yet is like sort of in the same universe as this story, but it's called Centaur Court, and all of the street names are like mythical. There's like all of the Greek characters are in, but it's a like really boring suburban neighborhood built in the 70s. And it's hilarious to me. So I know that I want at some point to have all of I want that centaur court to fill with centaurs, but I don't know. I haven't like gotten it like clear enough in my mind to make that happen yet. So it feels like it's still kind of existing in that like, haha, wouldn't that be funny world? But yeah, I keep a file. They're all over the place. I have one file on my computer of ideas. A lot of times it comes from titles, things like that I see in the world, that it's like like the animal mummies, where it just pops out immediately as like some sort of, whoa, what did we just do, us humans? And I'm gonna like grab that and hang on to it. And then sometimes they start as a what if. So there's another story in this collection where a young couple has recently fallen in love, and the girl, it occurs to her that one of them is going to die before the other one, and this is terribly upsetting. And then it sort of accelerates into her mind, and she feels like she's going to die soon, and so she comes up with this plan to swap hands with her beloved. So she finds a doctor in Thailand, and she's like, we're going to do this. It's not that big a deal, which is not a good idea. But that story started as it was the what if was that story minus the crazy idea is totally autobiographical. That one started as, I remember that feeling of being newly in love with this person, and I felt like one life was not enough, and it was not acceptable to me to just accept that we were gonna die, and one of us was gonna die first. And I remember waking. He was not my husband then yet, but he became that later. And I woke him up in the morning one day and was like, here's the plan. Whoever dies first has to move into the other one like a house. Like, you have to just like promise that you will like inhabit me and I will inhabit you, and that's how we're going to deal with this. He was like, whoa, what is happening over in your head over there? So that was my version of it. But then I thought, what if I like turn the volume up on that all the way and allowed the person who was the me character to be a little insane and to do something bigger. So it starts with that kind of a what if of what if I changed, like magnified or somehow, or turned up the volume on some sort of feeling and allowed it to have some like a physical presence in the world. Yeah. Many files of many ideas. Sometimes I forget about them for a really long time and then go back and feel like, what in the world was I ever thinking with this? I can't imagine how this could ever be a story. And sometimes they are like treasures that I discover immediately, can write quickly. So you never know what's going on in the back of the mind.
Hi. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you.
I guess my question is sort of about, I feel like myth and legend and fairy tales all sort of play a big part in your stories. And I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit, and if you had a favorite piece of like sort of collective storytelling.
Oh, that's a good question. I love all that stuff. I feel like that I went to a Waldorf elementary school, and so I didn't learn any of the usual things that you learn, but we did learn all the different mythology from all around the world. But it was long ago. I was a little kid. So it's kind of like in there as these vague, like amorphous, like floating clouds of ideas in my head instead of any. I don't remember like who exactly was Odin, but I remember feelings about Odin. So I work from that space a lot because I feel like it's these stories that belong to all of us in a way, and that we're all like sort of waving in and out of, and are aware of sometimes, and sometimes not aware of how we are using them. So I'm interested in the way that those are kind of transforming, and then the way that they belong to all of us, and are have completely different iterations in an individual. And I also wasn't an English major in college, and I didn't read most of the like stuff that you were supposed to read. So I think that I'm working a lot from those early kind of myths and fairy tales, and the stuff that was read to me before I understood any kind of historical context or any of the things that I as an adult now see. But it was just like, here's this magical beanstalk, and here's this space, and they're all really mostly scary. When you get fairy tales are terrifying and so grotesque and weird and creepy, and all about children in peril all the time, mostly alone. So that pushing up against that a lot too. What does it mean to inherit these stories that are kind of meant to freak you out and meant to make you aware that the world is an unsafe place, which I feel like is kind of the point, that it was like, stay inside after dark, guys, because it's not okay out there. And I don't know, do I have a favorite? I like the Greek myths because of I like the geography of the Greek myths. I like that they're all on different islands, and that everybody gets their own island, and they get to be in control of that island, and they get to wreak all kinds of havoc there. And I also like some of the fairy tales that I don't really remember exactly. I'm reading them to my kids now. I'm editing a lot because I'm like, this is horrible. I'm not reading you the story the way it's written. It's really mean and cruel. But it's interesting to be seeing them again now and realizing how much I misremembered them, but allowing that stuff to like seep in a little bit. Yeah.
So what do you like or don't like about writing short stories versus novels?
Good question. I have said usually that the pain to pleasure ratio is more in my favor for short stories. There's less suffering, less of the acute suffering anyway. I find a lot of despair in novel writing because you have to hold so much faith for so long, and you have to keep believing in this thing and coming back to it for hours and hours and hours again and again when you know it's not working yet, and you have to forgive it for not working for all those years and just keep trusting. It's really hard. It's uniquely difficult, where I think that I've ended up spending for sure as much time on both story collections as I did on both novels, but I didn't feel the time pressure the same way. It felt like I know that I can either if I keep caring about a story, I know that I can get it to be done, or if it fails, it's cost me, a couple of weeks of time and whatever. It's 15 pages. It's fine. It doesn't hurt my heart to be like, the story didn't work. But the idea of having to throw away a novel hundreds of pages in is a bummer, to say the least. So I always have them going at the same time. That's my prescription. I can't just have a novel, because I will when all of those days when I feel like this is officially impossible. I realize I've done it before. I realize a lot of other people have done it before, but I know for sure that it's not going to work. On that day, I need to have a short story that I can turn to and that I can play. Also, just play, because of that freedom and because of the reduced anxiety, I am freer to just be like, let's investigate this and how I wonder what form I could put that in and see what happens. And I can more quickly see if that's working. So I do a lot of switching back and forth. I'll work in stints. It's not like every day I'll do both, but I'll work usually for, a few weeks on novel stuff until I feel like either, okay, I got it to the next phase and now I need to take a break so I can see it again, or forget it, that thing is dead and I hate it and I'm never coming back to it. And then I work on stories for a few weeks and then I come back once I have fortified myself and regained a little bit of faith, then I come back and do novel stuff for a while. And if the novel's humming along, I don't always stop all the time. But there's always those files, too, on the computer of the short stories that I'm kind of investigating and imagining in the back of my head while I'm working on longer stuff. However, I also will say now, I have a different kind of trust in the novel writing process than I did before. And I am writing a new novel now, and I don't feel nearly as despairing. And it was a quicker process of having it come enough into the world that I trusted that it would stay alive, even if I took breaks. And so the first two novels, the way that I wrote the first draft was very, very quickly so that it wouldn't disappear. I felt like I was like trapping it in a jar. And I chose a moment when I had some time, and I worked as much as I possibly could. So I wrote 5 to 10 pages a day or on the weekdays, took the weekends off for about 6 weeks until I had a draft. If you write 10 pages a day, those pages accumulate really fast, and it starts to feel like, this is a thing. Look, I have 100 pages, and now I have 120 pages, and now, so that is how I survived that. And then it took, I think I revised my first novel 18 times, and those were not tidying up drafts. Those were like rewriting the whole book every time. So it wasn't an efficient way to work, but it was the only way I knew to work where I would survive it, and where I would believe that the thing existed, even though I knew that there was so much work ahead. And this time I don't have that same kind of space. I just don't. I have little kids and I have other work, and it's like I haven't had a 6-week period where I could disappear into it that way. So I have had to believe that it's possible to write a couple of pages a day for a few weeks and then stop because a thing happened that needed my attention. So I now have I did a stint in October, and then I did a little bit in January, and I will work on it again in April is the plan. And I have probably 100 pages. And even though I have almost no present action, so nothing is happening in the story yet, it's all exploratory. Who are these characters? What is this place? What other places could it be? What does it feel like there? It's all that stuff. I already kind of believe it and feel like I trust that it's going to turn into itself, and I'm not worried about turning my back on it for a little while. So that's a good feeling, partly just from experience, and also that I've come to really love the space of a novel, that there's so much. I had a teacher in graduate school, Christine Scott, who she came in one day, and we were all pining away about, none of us had actually started novels except for one person. And she said, "You guys, it's fine. You're okay. A short story is the closet and a novel is the whole house. It's the same. It's just architecture." I'm like, oh, but I like thinking about that. And I really have gotten to enjoy the way that you can investigate a few ideas and themes and situations from all kinds of different perspectives, and that you get this spaciousness to explore that you just don't get in a story. In a story, you have to be straight, direct all the time. And you can have you can come at it from a couple of little angles, but you basically have to be going directly to the heart of it all the time. Where in a novel, you get to have this swim around the idea in a way that's really fun. So I'm trying to just love that about it and not feel like I wish I could be done already. Because being done is actually the least interesting part, is the other thing that I've discovered. That the end is the end. That's it. There's no more, your part is over, and it's fun to have it be between covers and to get to go around and see a few lovely people in bookstores. But I feel like as this book was getting ready to come out, I was feeling kind of sad, and I realized that it's sort of like giving it away for me. My part is over, and now I turn it over and the stories do what they do in the world, but it really is none of my business after that. It doesn't have anything to do with me. So that is sort of tied into the novel and story thing of just letting go of the idea of the end as the goal, that the middle is the goal, the writing is the goal. If you are writing, you're living the dream. That's all it is. And stay in the middle as long as possible, because that's how you get the thing to be alive and beautiful, instead of hustling to the end and then it's over and you have to walk away and start something else. Yeah.
You just talked about your first novel, which I love. There's No One Here But All of Us.
Thank you.
That's very, very crucial and just beautiful, and has all the elements of your short stories, also in a compact way. But I was interested in your comment. I don't know if it was hyperbole that you rewrote it 18 times, but even if it was 12 times, the impetus to rewrite, did it always come from yourself, or did you share it with a group, or were there special teachers, or what role did an editor or agent play?
Yeah, that's it. It really was 18 times. It really was. It was 8 years over in the whole thing. I took breaks. I wasn't working on it for 8 solid years, but that's how many years it was existing somewhere in my brain, and where I was working on it in a conscious or unconscious or subconscious way. And I think revision is, I really like revising. That's the part that's the most fun to me. The first draft is kind of like, all right, does it exist? It exists. Okay, phew. But I feel like the real invention happens in revision for me, because then I have a sense of what I've made, and then I get to just like play with all the knobs and make it do all this stuff. I feel like that's where the kind of magician part gets to come out and make all kinds of things come true. So I'm happiest there. So that's not something that anybody else has to press me to do. Although that first time I did have this idea of the end that was very compelling. I felt like the point here is for me to get this novel written, finished, get an agent, get a book. Like, that's what I'm doing. That's the whole goal here, is book. So I rushed it, and I didn't pay as much attention as I should have. So I wrote the first draft when I was still in graduate school, and I had a couple of teachers look at it one at a time, and I revised based on their notes. And then I finished, and I was like, okay, I finished school. I had a couple people look at it and sending it out. And the agents that I sent it to were very confused. They got it, and they said, oh, this is not like the book that you described in your email. Like, what is this even? And it was the whole book was written in first person plural, so the whole voice was we all the way through, which I understood in my brain was a complicated choice, and that I knew that it was asking a lot of a reader. But I also at the time still felt like it was what gave the book teeth to me. Like it was how I understood the whole concept of the story, was that it was this collective voice. So I wallowed around after all those rejections for a little while and grouched. That was all on this round the world trip. I got the last rejection from that set of queries that I sent out right at the beginning of the trip. So I was like, sat on buses and thought bad thoughts about all those people. And then after, coming to terms with it a little bit, I realized that I needed to do something about that point of view, and I needed to find a way to both keep the voice, the collective voice, and also make it possible for a reader to land in the story. So I gave it to one of the characters, and so she's our person, but we also have these moments of hearing the we, and it's all we know that she's part of that all the time, even if she's the one we're looking at. So that after that, then I came home, and then I worked on it on that little couch, and then I sent it to an agent, and he got it right away. And then we worked on a draft together, and then he sent it off, and then I did a bunch of work with an editor. So that's kind of the way that book happened. But in general, my way is to do as much as I can before I get anybody else's input. I like to be just alone in my head for months if it's a story, years if it's a novel, and try to figure it out myself, take it as far as I absolutely can, because then when I give it to somebody, I'm getting information that I didn't already know. If I send it earlier, I already kind of know what the problems are or what the possible problems are. And then then I don't ever get that person's first read again. I want to not waste the first read. And I have a small writing group in Los Angeles, which is not where I live, so we don't see each other that often, but we are always each other's first readers, and they're people whose writing I adore. We all are huge supporters of each other's work. So they're the first readers, and then my husband is usually the second reader, and then my agent is usually the third reader. So I have sort of a system now. Yeah. But revision is best. It's so fun. It's so great. You've already got all your, it's like, yeah, you have all your little toys. You got your whole setup with all your guys, and you get to move them around and be like, what if we built a mountain over here? Yeah, that's really fun. Other questions?
I first came across your work by following other writers like Kelly Link and Karen Russell, and there seem to be a lot of writers right now, a lot of them female, who have similar preoccupations as you, postmodernism, fantasy, and weird fiction. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about what was going on in the collective subconscious about what you and your colleagues are drawing from.
Yes, I do have thoughts about that. I think we're all the world is so, maybe it's always felt this way, but it feels very much to me like we're living in a sort of science fictional universe a little bit. It's really hard to trust that the structure and architecture of the world is actually supporting us and that we are taken care of within it. And so to say, like, what if we aren't, or what does it feel like to live there? If you actually investigate the feeling is not tidy and it doesn't fit nicely inside of the narrative all the time. So what I'm trying to do, and I think what Kelly Link and Karen Russell and Manuel Gonzalez and Marie-Helene Bertino and lots of other writers who also write sort of fantastical fiction are trying to do is say, what if we allowed that feeling to be as big and tangly and weird as it actually is inside, but on the outside? And what if we gave it a physical space to kind of roam around so that we could see the crazy outsized lives that we're all leading on the inside and see them on the outside? And I feel like probably we always needed some of that, but I think we really do need that now. I was teaching, some of you know, a novel writing workshop with Tin House on the Oregon coast, and then one of the other teachers is Matthew Salasis, and he did an exercise with us where he asked us to think about audience, and he had us think about the audience, the people we actually show our work to, and then our idea of our larger audience. And I found myself so squeamish about it, just like feeling like I can't think about those people because if I think about them, then I worry about them. And I felt like one of the reasons that was true for me is just as a woman, the job is to like caretake and make sure everybody's comfortable all the time. And so I'm writing I'm trying to put that aside. I'm trying to not take out the cookies and see if anybody needs to pee and be like, what if I told you what I actually felt like? What if I actually said this stuff and allowed people to see what's going on inside, and what, not just me, but other people around the table kind of. And that, I feel like that's part of that impulse and part of why there are definitely some male writers doing this too, but I feel like there are more female writers doing it. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons that we're asked all the time to stay nicely in our sort of space and to make sure everyone's always comfortable. And this is a question back at that expectation. Does that make sense?
I understand that in some of your work, there are real people who have inspired some of your characters. When they read your work, does that make you uneasy, and how do they respond?
Thank you, Mary. Mary knows some of the real characters that have been in some of my work. Well, so let's see. There have been more characters who were real who are not alive anymore. And that is not a mistake. That is easier to feel like I have some. Yeah. So on both sides, no one is here except all of us was born out of stories that my dad's mom told me about growing up in Romania, and all of these stories of running. They left Europe during World War I. So the book is World War II, but they survived. My great grandmother survived on tree bark while running with her children through the woods for what I think is 3 years. Nobody's sure exactly how long it was. And meanwhile, my great grandfather he had been taken as a prisoner of war to Italy, and he had just a lovely time. He was well taken care of. I never met him, but he would say, the weather was warm, the women was warm. So she's like on the brink of starvation, and he's eating a lot of pasta and probably sleeping with lots of pretty Italian women. So I had those stories, and I knew that I wanted something to happen with those. And it wasn't until right before the book came out that I started to get nervous about this idea that it was going to be in the world and that people who knew those people were going to read it. And that I had drastically changed the story. That I moved the time period. The people in the book decide they're going to start the world over again and pretend that nothing else has ever existed. There's some leaps that were made. And I was like, and I remember sitting at my grandmother's table in New York and being like, what would your parents have thought of this? Would they forgive me for this? And she was like, what? No, they would be thrilled that you're telling this story. The story's alive if it's being told. And if it's being told, it's changing. There's no such thing as a fixed story. It just doesn't exist. And then I went on to the next novel, which is the other side of my family, which is kind of a sort of fallen American aristocracy, very wealthy, wings of museums with family names, but the money dwindles over the generations, and by the time it gets to me, we have the stories, but no more of the money. So it was kind of investigating that, and lots of art and lots of support of the arts, and really interesting, and female artists who were serious and excellent artists and who made a lot of choices in their lives that favored their art over other aspects. So that was closer. That one's we're a generation closer in that family, and there's a lot of documentation of the family too. So I felt like I was coming up against facts much more often that I had to either decide to accept or reject, which was way scarier. And that's why I wrote that book second, because I had the idea for both of them at the same time, and that one was much scarier. But the same thing, basically. I mean, when I gave that to my mom, that's her side of the family, she did have some things. She'd be like, Grandma would never have driven that car. Like, okay, I hear you saying that, but it's not actually her. She's a different character. And so it was harder for certain people to like breathe through that draft and be like, okay, it's fiction. I accept that it's fiction. But in the end, everybody again felt like this is its own thing, and it's a story that's being told, and so it's a story that's changing, and it's just sort of one of the many voices. And nobody, the one story doesn't ever replace another one. They just joins the kind of big story mush that we're all living in. But yeah, it is, maybe that's one of the other reasons that the short fiction is easier, because that's almost all completely invented, and I don't have to kind of hold on to, like, put into my backpack all of the real stuff and carry that with me through the whole writing process. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Any last questions, or are you guys all good? All right. Thank you all so much for coming. Buy a book, even if it's not mine.